Good morning on a Saturday. Busy, busy, busy as always here at Return to Tradition. Um, I received a message from a patron this morning asking me to comment on an article, and I'm going to kind of do so, even though a lot of the details I do feel are a bit above my pay grade, but it's easy to understand what he's saying. It's just describing, like, to teach what he's saying would be a little bit hard, but I understood the basics of it. And there's a debate brewing, and the article I'm referencing here is one published over at TFP by Tradition Family Property, which is a um, traditional Catholic organization. The author is Jose Antonio Ureta, who I have actually cited before on this channel, though it's been a very long time, honestly. He wrote an article responding to Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, who wrote a series of articles published in a variety of places, all basically saying the same thing. Dr. Kwasniewski was laying out the case for Bishop Strickland to tell Francis no if Francis tries to depose him. And I would take the time to summarize what Dr. Kwasniewski's his argument is, but Mr. Ureta actually does so himself in the article, and he does it in a much more concise way than I would. So I will quote him verbatim on that. He's doing in his debate with Dr. Kwasniewski. I hesitate to use the word debate now because debate is such a loaded term. It tends to mean like sowing strife and discord and all that kind of thing. But this is definitely not that kind of an article. It's a response and rebuttal sort of thing, a much higher brow kind of thing. And so that is a very good kind of thing to go over. And I'm going to hint to you that I don't agree with either positions. And I think there's a third position to take here. So here we are going to go over with this. Now, I'm going to give you a personal update, just to say an Ave Maria for me later, if you can, like a Hail Mary for me later. I turned my ankle at the gym this morning, which I know it's very petty sounding, but I spent 6 weeks recovering from a knee injury, and I finally got back to the gym yesterday. And then this morning at the gym, right after, like half or quarter of the way through my first exercise, I moved to go I was doing something called a superset, where you do one set of an exercise and you go immediately do another one, and then you rest and you do it back and forth like that. I had put the weight down. I was going to do something else, and I turned too sharply and I rolled my ankle. It's really dumb. I have to limp around right now. Thankfully, it's on my foot. That's not my driving foot. So it's really annoying. And I only bring that up because you may see me wince, and I mean that I impacted that ankle during the live stream. So that's all I'm saying. So yeah, and I do intend to offer it up. Just some prayers would be great. Anyway, let's talk about this debate between I would say it's not officially a debate, because I don't think Dr. Kwasniewski has responded to this yet, since the article was published yesterday at TFP. In addition to this, by the way, I have something for a letter from a bishop that I've pre-recorded that I'll play later in the stream. He's a German bishop, like probably retired German bishop, or a good German bishop, and he's just shredding the synod on synodality for trying to establish essentially, like, a new church on the magisterium of Francis as opposed to actual Catholicism. Is great. So we'll have that here in a few minutes. But Mr. Ureta, I think it's Mr., not Doctor, he enumerates Dr. Kwasniewski's points into 6 points here that are very simple. And the reason these are the basis for Dr. Kwasniewski's argument that Bishop Strickland should not accept the command from Francis to resign. Okay? So 1, it is not the Pope who makes a bishop, but Jesus Christ. In his own diocese, a bishop is not a vicar of the Pope, but a vicar of Christ, receiving his episcopacy from God at the Pope's delegation. That's Dr. Kwasniewski's point number 1. 2, the bishop's power to rule and care for the flock comes from Christ, not the Pope. Therefore, bishops have prior and legitimate rights rooted in apostolic succession that papal authority must respect regardless of its primacy. 3, overemphasizing the papal primacy concerning other elements of ecclesiastical life is an erroneous extrapolation and a narrow positivistic reading of the dogmatic definition of the First Vatican Council. Point 4, once someone is made bishop, he is bishop forever. Bishops are put in place by Christ and are permanently in place unless they give just cause for the grave step of deposition. Pius XII refused to purge the French bishops accused of collaboration with the wartime government there, declaring that such a thing had never been done before. Again, these are Dr. Kwasniewski's points. Bishops are wedded to their local church, just as Christ is the bridegroom of the whole church. Arbitrary removal would be tantamount to an ecclesiastical no-fault divorce. Therefore, a bishop, like a good father, should be prepared to die rather than discontinue caring for his flock, which would be at risk of being deprived of the sacraments, sound doctrine, and moral guidance. Popes are given authority for the common good of the church. When they arbitrarily remove a good bishop, they are ultra vires, i.e., beyond one's legal authority. Such an act would be null and void and should be ignored. The new bishop is an impostor and a usurper. Again, Dr. Kwasniewski's points being repeated in the summary provided by Mr. Ureta. And the final point. In emergencies, doing things not allowed in a normal situation is permissible. The momentary chaos of having two concurrent bishops claiming jurisdiction over the same diocese is a lesser evil compared to abandoning the flock to the wolves. Those are the characterizations of Dr. Kwasniewski's point as described by Mr. Ureta in his article that's published yesterday at Tradition, Family, and Property. Again, for those joining us late, this is on the subject of should Bishop Strickland resign, or if Francis says you are no longer the bishop of Tyler, Texas, should he accept that decision and not resist? Dr. Kwasniewski lays out his argument in several different articles saying no, using the points I just read from Mr. Ureta's article, who was as accurately as possible summarizing his points for him before making his own case. Saul Brown says, are we talking about the magisterium of Pope Francis or the magisterium of the Holy Roman Catholic Church? Yeah. Dory Provenek says, my weekend priest told me to do that, yet he expressly denied all Marian prophecies and apparitions. Well, I would, that's an alarming thing for a priest. But let's go over Mr. Ureta's argument. He spends a lot of time giving historic examples of times where popes acted in a way that could be argued were unjust. Some of these were in the World War II and post-World War II period in France, because there were some bishops who cooperated with the temporary government, others who did not. He uses the Napoleonic bishops, the bishops who were there during the French Revolution, who cooperated with the new government, and those who did not. And there was a big problem there. It was actually a period I did not really know much about, but that period was a small schismatic church referred to as the Petite Église. And I'm probably mispronouncing it. My French is as bad as my Latin. But his point, Mr. Ureta's response is essentially he wrote a complex historic analysis that combines theology with history to basically say, when you boil it down, that in many cases of seemingly unjust removal, bishops who did not comply all too often joined schismatic churches. He cites the Petite Église, which was the schismatic church that existed temporarily in the aftermath of the Napoleonic debacle in France. He closes his argument against the remote possibility of joining or starting a schismatic group by saying the following. This is from his article, quote, Pope Francis and his evil advisors and agents would be delighted if bishops who are unjustly removed from their dioceses for resisting their church demolishing agenda were to rebel against the papal order, going on to establish a 21st century anti-progressive Petite Église, end quote. That tells you exactly where Mr. Ureta stands. He is not a pope-splainer, okay? He is not one of these who just is submit and obey on normal things. And what he says there is absolutely true, that if Bishop Strickland were forced out one way or another, that is exactly what they would want. They would want the chaos that would ensue. And that's what makes it so compelling. Because remember where chaos comes from. Chaos and ambiguity and things are the tools of the adversary. They don't come from God. So what do you think of that, though? Do you think that essentially his complex argument is several examples of how this just went wrong and how other bishops complied even with the unjust order because the threat of schism was there? And remember, the church has a lot to say about schism. None of it good. That schism is a wound to the body of Christ, as one example. Which is why it's so strange that the church is handling the the German synodal way and handled it the way it did, and will probably do nothing about it because schism is almost considered as grave of evil as anything else. Deborah Saint says Bishop Strickland will obey. He is a humble man. He has said that if he is asked to resign, he'll say no. But if he goes through like the basic process and is deposed formally, then he will submit. And this is where my third option comes in. My third option is a little different than Bishop Strickland's, than Dr. Kwasniewski or Mr. Ureta. Dr. Kwasniewski tells him to resist, absolutely, from what I gather. Now, if I'm wrong, I would love to I would love to host a conversational discussion between Dr. Kwasniewski and Mr. Ureta on this. I would love to do that. So if either of you see this, email me, and I will happily try to work to set that up. But my position is simple. Looming over all this, and not over it, but existing off to the side watching all this, are two organizations right now. The Coalition for Canceled Priests, who probably who would love to have a bishop like Strickland working with them. And the other is Exsurge Domine, Archbishop Vigano's organization. Archbishop Vigano started Exsurge Domine in Italy to help independent traditionalist priests who had been essentially canceled, giving them resources and things so they can go administer to people offering masses. Still Catholic priests, not starting an independent church. This is essentially a waiting game to wait until this nightmare scenario that we're living through is over. Archbishop Vigano is almost 80 years old. He's going to need somebody to take the reins of that organization for him. And while Bishop Strickland may or may not be that bishop, it probably wouldn't hurt to have a bishop in America helping with Exsurge Domine, because Vigano just expanded Exsurge Domine to the United States. That's my third position, is help with one of those organizations until such time as we get a better pope. I'm curious what you think of all this yourself, though. Well, Lori, I'm not a saint either, so I'm not sure what your comment means here. But Kwasniewski may not be a saint. He'd probably agree with you. I'm not a saint either. I would be shocked if there was any saints in my chat. Maybe you're all better Catholics than I am, though. You probably are, honestly. Robert Richards says he finds it funny that many Catholics throw the SSPX under the bus, but yet they do not blink an eye when the German bishops promote open schism. Well, yes. Actually, you know what I find even funnier is when the SSPX are treated worse by typical lay Catholics than the Eastern Orthodox are, who actually are in schism and deny the primacy of the Roman pontiff. And I don't mean like the primacy of Francis. They deny the primacy of St. Pius X, of Innocent III, of John Paul II. Name a pope, they deny the primacy of him. They call him the first among equals and the patriarch of the West. They don't believe the church was founded on the rock of Peter. And yet they treat them better than the SSPX, who just want the same faith that we had a century ago. Very curious. Michael Searcy quotes Scripture, offer no resistance to one who is evil. Yeah, the saints have some stuff to say about that too. Some suggest to just submit, and others say openly resist. It's why it's so complicated. Kathleen Irish likes my idea. There are these mechanisms that exist right now in the church for this situation. Some would say they're schismatic. I would say they're just canonically irregular. Vigano doesn't deny, nor do the Coalition for Canceled Priests deny, doctrines and dogmas of the faith. In fact, one could argue that they are where they are because they don't deny those things. People seem to like my third option. I hope if Bishop Strickland sees this, he adds it to the things he's praying for discernment about. Could be nothing happens. I was wrong. I will fully admit. I expected this whole thing with him to be taken care of by the start of the synod on synodality. Let's see. Stephen Cass says, frankly, yes, it may be an unjust command, but if Bishop Strickland believes Francis to be the Pope, then he needs to follow his commands, even if they are unjust. Yep, there is, however, something that it needs to be reminded. We need to remind ourselves of here. Bishops have canonical rights. They're expressed right there in Code of Canon Law. There's a process for these things. And if Francis is going to remove him, it should be done through the process. Now, I'm also one who finds, the idea that popes are necessarily bound by canon law to be shaky. just because we're talking about a divine institution and we're talking about, explicitly how people cannot judge the Pope, which is why the whole Benedict is the real Pope thing is really hard also. Because you're making a judgment call at that point, and most people accept him. So is my position a bit of a threat to Francis? I maybe, except, Exsurge Domine is not going to be electing the next Roman pontiff. Vigano is not going to be the next pope. It's just not going to happen. Neither Schneider or any of those guys. So, but they exist to keep the true faith while we navigate through the storm of the synodal church of the new Advent. Let's see. But yeah, generally, I mean, I'm not surprised that my audience thinks that Bishop Strickland shouldn't resign. If this was, I don't know, Michael Lofton's stream, I would bet the mirror would be the case. It would be the polar opposite. Most people would say he should resign. I mean, that's just what I would expect, right? The people attract the audience who, you at least find, who either agree with or at least find their position interesting and not, off-putting. Either way, weighty arguments for both causes of action: resign or not. Pray for the good bishop who is undoubtedly seeking guidance through prayer right now. Yes, and the thing I like about that article I read, despite how heavy it is, it's like too heavy for me to just read on the channel, and it's new, which I don't want to just read on the channel either because of copyright issues, honestly. The one thing I like about it, though, is that it is just a respectful, peaceful rebuttal and counter argument. I miss those. I miss the days where people like me, there was no market for people like me. But we don't live in those times anymore. We now live in chaotic times where the church is spinning out of control. Have I, or would I attend the SSPX or the FSSP? I have attended Mass with the SSPX. I attend Mass with the FSSP right now. I don't have any issues with their canonical status. The Bishop Schneider's is like, his position on the SSPX, I think, is like pretty much perfect. He was sent by the Vatican to investigate them, in official capacity to observe. And he came back to the Vatican and reported that they were 100% Catholic, and that their position was that they were not in schism, that it was just that they don't have a canonical status, but that's an internal church matter to be discussed by the hierarchy and with the bishops of the SSPX. That's my position. I find it weird when laity get really hot about this issue. It's very strange. The SSPX priests that I've met have been as good as the FSSP priests that I've met. And I've met older SSP or FSSP priests and younger ones. So yeah, I know there are issues there, but again, this is not necessarily for the laity, I think, to be. And I think, if you want more complex arguments for the SSPX, Kennedy Hall is dedicated to that topic, and he does a really good job defending the SSPX. And there are no shortage of people going after the SSPX either. All right. Let's see. Deborah Saint says, I don't think Bishop Strickland should resign. However, Francis is like a dog with a bone. He takes fraternal correction very personally. Yeah, and I think that's why he didn't answer the first dubia, and why the dubia clarification for the second dubia has never actually been done, isn't going to be answered. Walrus Moose says he thought Mr. Uretta's article was excellent, a bit heavy for a quick read. Yeah, it is a bit heavy. This is the kind of thing I'd rather, if I were trying to mull over my position on this, I would want to spend time with. I will see if I can just put it in the chat here, because I already have a sources page, or on my sources blog. I already have a post for the day. I could probably add this to it, like edit the post so people can find it. But there's the post. Here, let's move on and talk a little bit about this letter. So you have a bishop who, his name is Bishop Marian Eleganti. He's a German bishop, and LifeSite published this letter from him, and it's a little, the translation is a little iffy, but you're going to get the idea. He's not a fan of the synod on synodality, and that is a beautiful thing coming from a German bishop of all types. So let's take a look at that. It is becoming increasingly clear, care of Cardinal Fernandez's latest statement on Facebook and his response to Cardinal Duca's dubia, what the newly propagated concept of synodality is really about: the dissolution of independent, hierarchical ecclesiastical authority in terms of doctrine and governance. The ecclesiastical hierarchy is to be leveled in its exercise into democratic, that is, synodal, Anglicanism processes. Authority then only exists in the form of democratic majority decision-making, which, as far as doctrinal position is concerned, is to be rubber-stamped by the ecclesiastical authority according to a majority vote, or in the form of a sacramental absolution, which may not be denied by the confessors according to the decision of the conscience of the penitent, but not of the priest as the authoritative judge in a concrete moral question. The final decision is then no longer the authoritative and autonomous decision of the bishop or priest, notwithstanding possible and advised consultation, but the majority vote, participation on the one hand, and the decision of conscience of the penitent seeking absolution on the other. The binding and redeeming power of the ecclesiastical authority would then essentially consist only in the execution of such decisions, not made by itself, at most tolerated by it, which are made by the majority or the individual, but not its own, the Church's conscience. All this is justified with the postulate to avoid abuse of power, clericalism, which of course is seen only on the side of the ecclesiastical authority. This is also a blind spot. The actions of the current pope alone stand out starkly in his unprecedented autocratic exercise, which stops at nothing and departs from this new synodal style in all areas: teaching, governance, personal management, jurisdiction. Yes, it is fundamentally contradicts him, without any of those noticing who constantly mouth synodality as a new magic formula and promote it at every opportunity in reference to the so-called new magisterium, but not example, of Francis. Jesus, however, entrusted the power of binding and loosing, sacramental authority, governing and teaching authority, exclusively to the apostles, who in turn entrusted it to their successors, the bishops. The Second Vatican Council, therefore, maintained the hierarchical structure of the people of God established by Jesus, and placed the episcopate in the appropriate middle ground, sub petro et cum petro, between papal absolutism and the participation of the laity. However, it did not abolish the essential, non-gradual difference between the ministerial priesthood, that is ordination, and the common priesthood, i.e. baptism, but rather emphasized it, and it is precisely this difference that the new synodality of the current design does not want to respect, which is why the Christian East does not see any comparability of such synodality, like the current one in Rome, with its own tradition and the practice going back to the apostolic times. Synods there are an exclusive assembly of bishops who exercise their authority in a binding way. Now, however, the pyramid, the hierarchy, is not only to be turned upside down, which the Pope desires, but does not actually do, but it is being pulverized in an outright democratic way. Exempt from this is the papal absolute authority, which in the end can make out of synodal votes anyhow, authoritatively and autonomously, what it has wanted from the beginning, together with others who could not enforce it without it. The surveys then primarily to achieve the end, broader acceptance. In my estimation, these are the facts. It is about the latter. The practice is, after all, above the idea according to the so-called magisterium of Francis. I know only that, the magisterium of the Church. The processes are irreversible, but only if one does not take into account the Lord. They are meant to free the Church from its old errors, rigidity, dogmatism, and clericalism. In other words, finally, under this pontificate, the spaces can be taken on which one has been covetedly squinting for a long time, at least since the 1960s, if not longer, in contrast to one's own assertion that one has never aspired to this, to trigger processes, not to want to take spaces. Whoever objects or is against it speaks too little with the Spirit, and because one will still not achieve this in 2023 in a new attempt, another one is necessary in 2024. Meaning that what is not finished this year will be magically finished next year. This text was by Bishop Marian Eleganti. It was originally written in German and published by LifeSite News. Did you find that easy to understand, essentially? That his argument seems to be in that letter that we are witnessing and living through, watching a quote-unquote reform of the church based entirely on the magisterial authority of one reigning alleged pontiff, as opposed to any real authority, any semblance of any real theology in the church. That is what we're going through. That's what that letter is in a nutshell. And he's a German bishop. And as you saw from his picture, he's not that old. I kind of wonder if he's going to be safe writing something like that. Terry Durda says she finds a lack of unity and clarity in the Vatican appalling and scary. Too many Catholic voices online not in agreement. How does one choose? Just join an ICKSP church. Seems like you have a good parish then, probably. Now, there are some who would say anything that's not the SSPX or Sedevacantists are bad, but I'm not one of those. I've never been to a mass with that fraternal priesthood, but I'd love to, because their masses are just gorgeous from everything I've seen online. Although I personally tend to prefer low masses, but the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest are known for their wonderful, beautiful high masses. Lori, be careful. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not bringing up Father Jackson stuff. I'm not making any commentary on the Father Jackson stuff. Just be careful. But ostensibly removes culpability from the Pope. He's just following the Spirit. Let's see. I will be doing a live stream tonight, probably at my usual middle of the night time. If you are like me, an early bird, or stay up typically very late on a Saturday, it'll be about 2:30, give or take, Central Standard Time. You can catch it there. You may have heard of the story of this thing about the Vatican asking us to bless demons now or something. I'm going to have a lot to say about that tonight. So it'll be entertaining. So you should make sure to tune in and either catch it live or catch it in the next stream. So if you've got any questions, now is the time to ask them through a regular question or a super chat, whatever you want to do. Just get them in now. Otherwise, I'm going to log off here in the next couple of minutes, because this stream went a little longer than I thought it would, actually. So Roseanne says that she has a friend who goes to mass with the Institute of Christ the King in Florence. That is cool. Wish we had them in Oklahoma, but we have the FSSP and the SSPX, which makes us better off than most people. And that's not counting Sedevacantist options either, which there are plenty in my state. In other words, democratic church built on the foundation of Francis versus apostolic tradition. Yeah, that's what it's about, right? Drive up to Springfield. No, I looked. That's a close one. It's like 8 hours away, give or take. I'd like to, maybe someday, but right now I have a autistic 5-year-old son, a 2-year-old daughter, and a almost 7-month-old baby son. That's a long drive for tiny children. Paul stood Peter to his face. Bishop Strickland should do the same with Pope Francis. It would be interesting to see that exchange if Bishop Strickland publicly confronted Francis to his face. And I don't mean online. I mean at St. Peter's Square, or at a conclave, or not conclave, but at a consistory or some other formal function, and challenged him to his face. That would be fascinating to observe. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks. If you didn't catch this when it started, I suggest you catch it here on the replay, and as we go over things, because this is an interesting topic. There's a debate brewing on the subject of Bishop Strickland. I don't know if Dr. Kwasniewski will respond or not to Mr. Ureta. Mr. Uretta's position is essentially that Bishop Strickland should just, if Francis wants to remove him, that he should go. And Dr. Kwasniewski seems to disagree. Catch the beginning of this if you haven't seen this, if you're just tuning in. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I will see many of you, I'm sure, tonight at the my middle of the night live stream in about 15 hours or so. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless you.